Hey, welcome to episode 10 of the Fight for the Future live stream. My name is Joe Thornton. I'm video producer here at Fight for the Future, and today I am joined by Caitlin Seeley George, who is Director of Campaigns and Operations here at Fight for the Future. We've also got Ryan Single, who is an Open Internet Fellow at Stanford Law School Center for Internet and Society. And I've also got Mark Stanley here, who is Director of Operations and Senior Strategist at Demand Progress. And today we're going to be chatting about, where net neutrality's been, where it's at, and where we're going into the future. If you like content like this, please always remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and click the bell for notifications so that you can see when we go live for conversations like this in the future. I think we can just jump right into it. So this is sort of a question for everybody, but can you give folks who maybe don't know about net neutrality sort of the elevator pitch on what it is and why it matters and why we should have it?
I'll jump in. I always like to define net neutrality in like a really simple way, which is, it's the principle that the companies that we pay to get online don't get to decide what we do online, right? So we, the people who get online, right, should be able to use whatever apps, websites, services we want without interference or pushes from the companies like AT&T or Comcast, Verizon, who we pay to get online.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's pretty concise.
Yeah, I mean, and when you talk about these internet service providers, we're really talking about companies that in a lot of cases, they're monopolies, they're duopolies. And so giving them this gatekeeper power is all the more problematic because of that. And, that's why we refer to this as a free speech issue. It's obviously, it doesn't involve, government blocking or censorship of speech, but, rather that potentially happening at the hands of these, these companies that, like I said, are in some cases monopolies and duopolies. I mean, speaking of monopolies, I don't want to put you on the spot, Caitlin, but I think we were just chatting a while ago and you're saying you only have one choice of internet provider in your area, which is Comcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it sucks. And it's not very good and it's expensive. And that's definitely a piece of the problem as well, is just these kind of monopolistic setups where only one internet service provider is available, especially more so in, less urban communities, but also the case in some urban communities as well. And so, they can decide what we have access to or throttle and slow certain speeds to certain content or not. And it's all on them. And you don't have the kind of consumer right angle where it's like, well, okay, then I can vote with my dollars and leave and go somewhere else. It's the only option.
So where are we at right now with net neutrality? Like, there was the fight in 2013 where we got net neutrality enshrined through the FCC, and then 2017 Ajit Pai's FCC repealed it, and it's been a few years since then. Where are we at, and what are the short-term events and long-term events, for that matter, that are going to sort of define the next few years of this fight?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. You teed it up, and during the Obama administration, the FCC passed the Open Internet Order of 2015, which classified broadband internet access under Title II of the Communications Act. And all that is just sort of a legalistic way to say that the FCC had legal authority to actually ensure that net neutrality was being enforced. And Title II does more besides just the classic. It allows for the FCC to do more than just enforce net neutrality. It allows for the FCC to deal with everything from unfair data caps to privacy violations by ISPs. But it basically just gives them the authority to actually provide oversight of broadband providers. Like you said, that order was overturned in 2017 by the FCC, which was chaired by Ajit Pai under President Trump. And Ajit Pai was a former lawyer for Verizon. He made it clear that this was a top priority to overturn this. And basically what it did is it just took away oversight authority for the FCC. It allowed, it allowed these monopolistic or duopolistic ISPs to be unregulated and to screw over consumers. So what happened in the aftermath of that is that the Senate actually passed something, it's called a Congressional Review Act, but basically they passed something that reversed the FCC's reversal of net neutrality. It passed with bipartisan support. It had every Democratic senator and even some Republicans. Unfortunately, that didn't pass in the House, but what happened in the next Congress, the next session, is that the House actually did pass a bill that would restore net neutrality protections. That, however, didn't reach the didn't pass in the Senate. So what we basically had in the aftermath of the Trump FCC reversing net neutrality is that legislation passed in both chambers to basically restore net neutrality with bipartisan support. It just didn't happen at the same time. So if that makes sense, during the same session. So where we're at now is obviously Democrats have taken back very narrow control of the Senate, thanks to the wins in Georgia. And we have a Biden administration. And so what we're looking for now is for Biden to nominate an fifth FCC commissioner. Right now, the FCC is deadlocked 2-2, and for the Senate to confirm that commissioner so that the FCC can get down to work and do things like restore Title II net neutrality protections. And so that's really where we are right now.
Is there anyone?
Yeah.
So
one thing.
Sorry, go ahead, Caitlin.
I was just going to hop in and say, I think that's a good history of this fight. And one thing that I'd just throw in there, and one thing that I know is in progress and Fight for the Future and all the groups that we work with have kind of made a big part of this effort, is that every step of the way, all of the action around, net neutrality and protecting access to content online has happened because of really massive grassroots support and action. We've been talking about the Obama FCC enshrining FCC protection and net neutrality. That wasn't something that, just because he was a Democrat, he was down to do. He was not. And so, from that point and moving forward to fighting Ajit Pai and Trump's repeal of FCC net neutrality, to the passing of the CRA and support for the Save the Internet Act, all of that has happened through massive amount of grassroots support. So it's also just been one of those issues that has been pushed forward because people have engaged on this issue, which I think is, pretty cool. And it's why there's been bipartisan support and why we've gotten, people like Senator Murkowski to support legislation on this and things like that. So I think that's a really important piece of the story as well.
Yeah, people like a free and open internet. They like being able to visit what sites they want. They don't like cable companies like Comcast and Verizon and AT&T. So I think you can explain this issue in a lot of terms like net neutrality or Title II and some of these a little bit more technical terms. But I think it's just an issue, like Caitlin said, that the public it just really has resonated with the public. And there's been a ton of organizing. But over the last decade, if you look at like grassroots activism on this, it's been an issue. It's seen some of the most mobilization, I think, which is just incredible. And it's really got us to a place where we really are on the verge of like restoring and potentially permanently these protections, which is really, really great. But it's taken years, if not decades, of work to get us here.
Yeah, I would jump in. So one, yeah, that's absolutely correct, right? The Obama administration actually had 2 open internet orders, right? The first one came in 2010 and did not do Title II and was kind of weak and built out of twigs and twine, and it got overturned in court. And then they were just going to do the same thing until folks like Demand and Fight for the Future essentially mobilized enough people to convince the Obama administration to make real rules. And I want to build on like a kind of like Caitlin, you said like a funny thing about they repealed the FCC as not the right thing, but in fact that's sort of what they did, right? When right, when they I think it's important to note that like when Ajit Pai repealed net neutrality rules, right, they didn't just get rid of the rules. They literally said that the FCC has no authority over the broadband ISPs, and like they're basically like any other service on the internet. And the only thing they have to do is like, you know, be transparent. I mean, they basically took the word communications, like, I mean, the internet is the communications, like, you know, the most important communications network ever invented, and they like took that out of the FCC, right? And just to sort of why that's important is to sort of tie that back to where we're at now, is because the FCC said it had no authority, that opened up space for the states to step in. So California in 2018 decided that it should protect its own citizens. And if the FCC says it's got no power, then California will step in. And so, you know, they didn't restore everything from Title II, but the California law restored like all the crucial protections of the 2015 Open Internet Order. And it's been stuck in court and myriad like challenges, but in February, a court judge said California can now start enforcing its net neutrality law. And as of about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, maybe, we now have the strongest net neutrality rules in the country, and they are, they're there for like all Californians. It's still lots of like court fight around, but I would just say like where we're at now, it's important to note that California has us out here in California actually have net neutrality protections.
So one thing I wanted to jump to, and I do definitely want to get back to the California stuff, but we're getting a lot of questions in the chat about this, and we almost got to it within the last question. But something that, and this is actually a question from Reddit, so it's like a really big question coming from viewers, is who are we hoping for, or like two versions of the question is there a certain individual that various organizations are hoping Biden nominates as the 5th FCC commissioner? And then a variation on that question that's coming in through the chat a lot is why is it taking so long for the Biden administration to nominate a 5th commissioner?
Yeah, I as far as the nominee, I think there's a very clear set of criteria that groups that have been working on this issue for a long time have laid out, and that we put into our petition at battleforthenet.com, which over 100,000 people signed, which is it has to be somebody, first and foremost, with no ties to the telecom industry, right? We've seen, I mentioned Ajit Pai earlier, the fact that he's a former lawyer for Verizon, which, of course, opposes Title II protections and net neutrality. But anybody who's worked in industry or with industry on this is not going to be a good fit, because they're going to likely be sympathetic to the anti-net neutrality stance of these companies. So we can't have anybody with telecom industry ties. Somebody like that would be, I think, forcefully opposed by not just our groups, but by the public at large. And I think we've seen some good signs, some other picks for other agencies. I think I'll be frank, I think the Biden administration, if you compare it to previous Democratic administrations, has been actually better in a lot of ways on personnel choices. So that's good. And I think we have reasons to be hopeful that they will pick somebody public interest minded for this position. And I think we've seen some indicators that that's how they're leaning. So I think we have reason to be hopeful there. As far as why it's taking so long, I mean, listen, I was talking to a reporter, I believe it was earlier this week, Andrew Wyrich at the Daily Dot, who has really good coverage on this issue. Folks should follow his reporting. But he had looked into it, and I think at this point in the Trump and Obama administrations, the FCC, there had been the FCC 5th commissioner had been at least nominated, so they were on their way to having a full FCC, and that's obviously not the case here because we don't yet have a nominee. I mean, I think the obvious answer is that the Biden administration has been putting out some major fires, dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, as they should be, dealing with different crises left over from the Trump administration. So I think there's been some understanding, both, I can speak on behalf of myself, and I think other groups as well, that, all right, we get it. This has been a unique time in history. There's a lot of work to be done. We are getting to this point right now where it's kind of like, all right, come on, let's go. Let's speed this up a little bit, because each day that we don't have a functioning FCC, there is a real cost to that, right? Like the only way we're going to restore Title II protections is if we get that fifth commissioner in there and we can break the 2-2 deadlock. So we got to do that. We got to make sure it's never been more important that frankly, it's never, as integral as broadband is, especially now during the pandemic, it's never been more important that we have an advocate. We have an FCC that can actually be an advocate for the public and not for telecom. So we got to get somebody in there. And I think that was the point of our Battle for the Net petition, which got some good press, and why we're upping the urgency on this. So, I think, yeah, go ahead, Caitlin, sorry.
Well, I was just going to agree. I think, obviously there's a lot of going on, and sometimes we get like stuck in, policy head and forget that there's still a pandemic going on. But I think we've also been seeing, that has been the exact reason why we need a functioning FCC as well, is that, we have emergency broadband funding that has been allocated to make sure that people can, get online, like you said, especially now within the pandemic, when people are still, even though people are getting vaccinated, which is awesome, we're still all working from home, and people are still learning from home, and we're still depending on internet to live our lives and find the vaccine appointments that, we have to spend hours trying to track down as well. So like you said, it's highlighted just how important this is. And it's also really highlighted the digital divide and the fact that rural communities, a lot of urban or communities of color have been redlined out of broadband access. And so, it's just highlighted again more and more why we need a functioning FCC that does have the authority over ISPs in order to make sure that everyone has access to the internet that we need to survive right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also like bridging the digital divide and making sure everybody has access to high-speed broadband. It's like, it is an essential service. It is infrastructure, and having a fully functioning FCC is going to help with that. I mean, Ryan, I don't know I think you're good at talking about some of the ways that, a fully functioning FCC can help with affordability. If you wanted to talk about some of that.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. The one other thing is, I think there's definitely this sort of like, desire for people to have one candidate, a name that they can kind of like rally behind and like, this is the right person. And I think the thing is like, there are a lot of people who have been working on this issue and related issues and sort of, and know their stuff about like spectrum policy and digital equity and redlining. And so I think that, the push is less like, there's one particular hero that we need, as opposed to like, there's a whole large group of people who would be good for this role. And then maybe like when you get to the point that there's a press leak and it's like, this former Verizon lawyer versus like, like this person over here who's been working on, digital redlining, right? Then like you get the point, okay, like now we have
it'll
like,
become clear.
Yeah, right. And I think it's also great because like there are so many good possible choices that we don't have that like one sort of like here's our one champion, the only person that can win all of this for us, right? So it might feel a little nebulous now, but I think we're actually sort of blessed that we don't have to have the like, here's the one person you have to have, right? But getting back to your question mark around, what a fully functioning FCC can do to help with affordability, right? So, there's lots of sort of weird wonky things that happen with under Title II. So you're able to do things like, so right now, there's a weird question around Lifeline, right? So Lifeline is the program that the FCC runs that helps, households with low incomes to subsidize, their communications. The problem is that Lifeline is tied to a Title II service, a phone line, right? So if you just wanted to get a pure broadband service at your house, it's not clear that it's legal for the FCC to give you that subsidy, right? And we may run into some of these same problems now that in December the Congress passed the EBB, the emergency broadband benefit. So essentially people who have low incomes, and that's something that gets defined, like if you're eligible for various other programs, you can get this. You'll get $50 a month to spend on communications, which can be your broadband at home, can be your mobile phone, can be both. But giving the FCC the ability to make sure that that works if you if you just want to spend it on something that doesn't have a voice component. And so and that causes weirdnesses, right? So out where I live in California, in Northern California, there's a great broadband provider called Sonic, and they lay a bunch of fiber. They support net neutrality. They don't do data caps, like all sorts of great stuff. But when you sign up, they also give you a phone line, even though they're just running fiber, and you have to have it, right? It's sort of, and the reason is because they want to be considered, right, to be available for kind of subsidies, right? And so then you pay all these other weird sort of taxes, and so then you get a home phone line that you didn't need. There's also, things around when you are if you're a smaller service trying to deploy broadband somewhere, you're doing fiber, you want to get access to the existing utility poles, right? And you want to be able to hang your stuff, your wires on those utility poles. If you aren't a Title II communications service, you don't have the right to just say hey, I'm going to do this, I'll pay you $15 per pole. The people that own the poles, which are usually Comcast, AT&T, Verizon, not, sometimes they're municipalities, but usually often it's the service providers, they can just say no, right? They're just literally just no, I'm not going to do that, or slow you down, or charge really exorbitant rates, or say, sure, you can hang your stuff on that pole, but that pole's falling down and needs maintenance, so you have to go and fix that, and do the work for us. So when you have an FCC that actually has authority, you can force that not to happen. You can essentially say, the access has to be reasonably priced, and you have to give them access in a reasonable time frame, right? You can do it's called a shot clock. And there's other things too. So just generally, when you have an industry that has no regulation whatsoever, they're just not afraid of anything, right? And we saw this in California when Verizon cut off a mobile data hotspot for firefighters in Santa Clara, right? Santa Clara has a sort of a mobile vehicle that was helping to coordinate firefighters. This was a couple of years ago in what was then the worst, wildfire in California history. And they hit their data cap, and Verizon cut their data stream down to something ridiculous, 128 kilobits per second or something, right? So, saying we didn't cut you off, but we just took you to a trickle, and they couldn't get the data to flow again, right? They had to go through this whole weird, crazy process, and the FCC didn't say a thing, right? Ajit Pai didn't say anything, Brendan Carr didn't say anything, right? As the Republicans on the FCC didn't. And if you had an FCC where they had authority, even if it wasn't over that particular thing, you have companies that are going to be much more responsive to consumer, in that case, public safety needs, consumer things, just because they know you don't want to do stupid things that make regulators step in and be okay, now we have to do this, right? So that's, and that works with affordability as well, right? So having an FCC that has authority will put a little bit of fear into, AT&T, Spectrum, right? Whoever, when they decide they want to raise their rates.
Can I make one point, Ryan? In your response,
Yeah.
I think, you're so knowledgeable in all this, but I think you just use the term regulators, and I just want to say that we're not. This is that term regulation. It gets thrown around as a bad word. However you feel about it. This is really at a bare minimum, just making sure there's anybody making sure that these monopolistic companies don't screw over the public. It's not imposing heavy regulation. In a lot of these instances, it's just making sure that, in Ryan said, there's some agency that when Verizon does throttle the data of a fire department fighting an active fire, there's somebody that's going to address that. Yeah. And without the Title II authority, like the FCC has basically removed itself from the equation, and there's nobody really there. So it's literally just making sure there's a bare minimum somebody there and making sure the public is not getting screwed over. And to take it back to the conversation in the beginning, that's even more important when you're talking about companies like that are monopolistic, duopolistic, when people have limited choice in the area, like Caitlin with Comcast. So I just wanted to make that one point in response to Ryan's great comments.
So this question is sort of related to what you were just saying about, having limited choice, maybe just you only have Comcast as an option for internet in your area, or also relying on companies being able to deploy broadband to different areas. This question comes from Reddit. Why don't more cities have their own municipal fiber networks?
Ryan, I feel like you should take this one.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe Ryan.
Okay.
Ryan
I just feel like I was talking a lot.
No.
It's a great question. So we've seen some like really good successes, right? So Chattanooga calls itself the gig city. They built a fiber network that's cheap, that's paid itself off faster than expected. So the thing about building a fiber network is like you do have to put a decent amount of money in ahead of time, and then you kind of pay it off over the years, right? So that's the kind of thing that cities can do through like municipal bonds, right? So so for some cities, bond measures, you need to get them, they have to go onto the ballot, and so you do have sort of a, at first you have sort of a PR, sort of like convince the public this is the right use of federal funds or sort of local funds. And then two, when you do that, right, you get the AT&Ts, the Comcasts of the world that come in and, pay a bunch of people to make it sound really scary, and the town is going to go bankrupt, threaten to sue, actually sue. They've gone to, I don't know the number, there's something like 17 states that have literally banned municipalities from doing this, right? So the big cable has managed, went in and basically wrote bills and got them through the legislatures, so that municipalities can't do that. Or in Tennessee, within Chattanooga, right? Chattanooga has built this really nice thing, and they're like, okay, we could expand this. Like, there's people that are like just outside our borders that are on terrible DSL, and we can afford to expand our network. And Tennessee legislature like banned them from doing that. Like, they can't go outside their borders, right? So there's some of that, and there is a lot of fear of these companies, right? They make a lot of money. Years ago when I was a tech reporter, I was talking with a city manager, sort of the tech manager in Santa Monica, California. And starting in the mid 90s, they had a policy, anytime they did any sort of work on the street, they would just put fiber in, right? And so they had all this fiber, and the only thing they ever did with it for the public was, like, if anybody's ever been to Santa Monica, they have the Santa Monica Pier, which sort of full of games and rides and so forth, and they did like public Wi-Fi out there off of their dark fiber, and they used the fiber for the city stuff. And then eventually they realized, oh, this would be a really great way to get some of the people in Hollywood that are doing video editing to relocate to Santa Monica, because we have these really great fiber lines that connect really fast, and so they were selling them just to businesses. But they could have done it for Santa Monica residents, but they didn't, because they were afraid, right? They were afraid of what Verizon would do if they decided to offer this to the public, right? So it's like literally the infrastructure's there, but there's just a fear of these companies that have so much money and so much political clout. So I think there's a mixed answer, and I think we're starting to see a sea change around this, and it's nice to see the we saw this with in Elizabeth Warren's call for sort of public options, and what we're seeing now from the Biden administration talking about like funds for munis or co-ops, and I think, co-ops are a great model. So I think we're going to see more of it, but, I don't know how soon, right?
Yeah, I think that's
also,
Mhm.
I was just going to say, it's kind of interesting. We've been talking at Fight for the Future about, to your point, Ryan, like these companies have a lot of money and they are kind of scary and they have a lot of political sway. And I think like Biden's first big fundraiser was hosted by I can't remember who, but like,
Comcast.
telecom. Yeah, Comcast. So like, they have a lot of power and a lot of sway. But one thing that we've noticed that's kind of interesting is in the past few years, a lot of the public, despite maybe being upset about their internet service provider at home, they've stopped seeing like big cable as a threat. And now we're talking more about like big tech or the platforms and things like that. And it really, and just, getting back to the point of these companies have a lot of money and good marketing and things like that. We imagine that's not on accident, and that these companies are trying to, turn the attention to big tech instead of big cable. And so they're still there. They still have the power and the money and can still impact a lot of these things, but they're trying to like have less of the public profile so that they're not seen as the bad guys anymore, even though they absolutely are.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that all these companies have in common is just like a massive presence in the halls of Congress and then in state legislatures as well. Like we saw that in the fight for the California net neutrality legislation. California has a lot of Democratic and progressive lawmakers, but ISPs were in pretty deep, and it took frankly probably more fighting than it should have to get this passed. Like a lot of times too, I think a lot of people with this, like you look at polling, it's something like between 80 to 90% of people, I mean, talking across the board, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, like support net neutrality. It's just, I think though, I forget who, Caitlin may have made the point earlier that might be true. They might have these armies of lobbyists in Congress and state capitals, but like the public support for this and grassroots activism has really like carried us through the years and brought us to this point where we're really on the cusp of restoring these rules. So I think we got to see who the FCC nominee is, but I think one important takeaway is that folks might be focusing on the big tech companies, the edge providers more, the Facebooks, the Googles, et cetera. And people might be a little, kind of like, all right, we've been fighting this net neutrality thing for a long time, but like, I promise you, we're in this super important moment and we're like so close to like getting these rules back and moving forward in a way that's more permanent. So, folks should just really keep engaging in this space.
Yeah. And on that, we've had conversations about this too, that if you're, hits at Facebook and Google, those are the exact companies that, are likely to continue to benefit and grow because of the lack of net neutrality and FCC oversight, because those are also the companies that can pay to play.
Yeah, for sure.
And keep getting the access they need to your airwaves, whereas other platforms and smaller ones don't necessarily have the power to do that.
When we talk about net neutrality, three things we talk about are no blocking by ISPs, no throttling, and no paid prioritization. And those companies are going to be the ones who can afford deals with the ISPs for paid prioritization to reach you faster. And then what happens with that is the small guys get choked out. They can't compete. They don't have the same money. So yeah, no net neutrality at this point is a good thing for those companies. So if you're worried about Facebook, if you're worried about Google, which you should be, you should also be worried about net neutrality 100%.
So speaking about paid prioritization, I think that the playing field has changed a bit since 2013 and even 2017, with the sort of the beginning of like the really big stream wars between like streaming content providers. If you look at the playing field for streaming content, Comcast owns a 33% stake in Hulu. They fully own Peacock, and AT&T owns HBO Max. And all of these services have tens of millions of subscribers. And in the case of Peacock and HBO Max, they didn't even exist when net neutrality was repealed. Given that these companies are owned telecom companies, and also just on the side, Amazon and Disney are entering this too. These are massive companies. These players can either own the fast lanes or can afford the fast lanes. How does the streaming wars in a non-neutral internet affect the fight for net neutrality?
I just can't believe we have to talk about Peacock at all. Why does that even exist? They took all the good shows off Netflix. Can't watch The Office anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's related in a really huge way. I mean, again, like talked about giving these massively powerful companies, and they're powerful both in their market share and the political power they wield. We've hit on that, but allowing them to be the gatekeepers of what you and what we, the public, can see, it's going to really affect like the content that we have available to us. It's going to affect competition in a way that's going to make it harder for some content to get out there, right? And you can end up in a situation that looks more like cable TV in some ways, which is like, the antithetical to all the reasons why the internet is good and open and democratic, and we don't historically have these gatekeepers. So I'm trying to think. I'm gonna actually look this up, but I think there have been some instances in the last couple years of internet providers actually been like I think using higher speeds for their own services, like services they own. So yeah, you're exactly right. These as these companies start to and then the other thing, as mergers start to happen, both like vertical and then with like other internet providers, like it's problematic too, as more companies come under the umbrella of these already too powerful companies. It's just like you definitely then don't want these companies having the gatekeeping power to decide what you see and what you don't see. So it's all definitely related and just makes it more urgent in my view.
Well, to me, it just seems like a red alert, like when they own the pipes and the content flowing through the pipes, and there's no way to moderate the way that they're using these paths. It seems like a really big deal to me.
Absolutely, Joe. So one, I always think it's kind of funny, like that. I don't know what it is about running like an ISP sort of like telecommunications business. Like it just like, I think it's just like something about like the executives there feel like it's just not sexy enough, right? So like let's go and buy like a TV studio, right? So if you're like Comcast, you need to go and buy like MSNBC Universal, if you're AT&T, like you go and spend $108 billion that you don't have to go and buy Time Warner and HBO, etc.
Because the people who run those companies definitely have the skill set to create content too.
Right. Yeah. It never works out. Verizon bought Yahoo. And AT&T bought Dish, and that didn't work out so well for them. I think they just wrote that off. But we have but Joe's right. So like when you own the pipes, you own a ton of content, right? And you have like almost no like oversight, right? Like that's the perfect way to like get away with murder, right? And we saw this happen in 2000, I think it was 13 to 2015, where sort of behind the scenes, the big telecoms all decided, we have a new idea. Let's force all of the like companies that we don't own to pay us directly, right? So, and if they don't pay us, we'll slow them down, right? And we'll do that by like making things congested, in the evening. So they did that to games, right? So, if you wanted to play World of Warcraft, right? If that company didn't pay, charter, then all their stuff slowed down. They did this to Netflix. Like, they slowed down the internet for tens of millions of Americans, and there was like lots of other sort of like casualties along the side. And it's behind the scenes, like you can't see it. And it took the New York Attorney General's office, sued them, and it took them about 2 years to get all the documents and prove everything. And Charter eventually settled, and they gave refunds to some people, right? But they have used their position, right, to either protect their own online properties or to protect their traditional cable and sort of side telecom sort of offerings. So yeah, I think it's absolutely right. Especially as you have these vertical integrated things. When we saw that with HBO Max, right? AT&T was zero rating HBO Max, and
Yep.
And they only stopped, and that was only for if you're an AT&T customer who also was doing HBO Max, and you were on a plan that had a hard cap limit, right, 8 gigabytes a month, then you could watch as much HBO Max as you wanted, but not Netflix, right? And all that other stuff would count against your cap. And it wasn't until the California law went into effect that AT&T stopped doing that and giving themselves an unfair advantage over other people. Right?
Yeah. And did that apply to the rest of the country?
The law didn't, but HBO was so mad about it that they decided to be like, oh, it's so tough. The state laws are so hard. We're just gonna have to turn this off for everybody. And in reality, people already had in their control panels for AT&T, there was a button you could turn on and off zero rating. So it wouldn't be very hard for AT&T to go in and just turn that button off for everyone who has a billing address in California. But they preferred to cry, so they turned it off for everybody. And great, it's an unfair competition, so I'm okay with that.
And so basically sorry, Joe, I was just gonna, so what was happening is there's people who had data caps under the AT&T plans. HBO Max, which Time Warner AT&T owns, wasn't, if you could go over your data cap if you were watching HBO Max. Is that right?
Yeah.
But if you were with Netflix, you couldn't.
Yep.
So it's just these vertical and then that benefits the company they own. It harms other company. And then the ripple effect of all this, right, is you might not even see it immediately, but it's going to mean less and less competition, which means less diverse content, less choice. It's just, it's really insidious, and it's really bad. And it's really these companies just entirely putting their giant greedy thumbs on the scale for the benefit. There's a clear, it's not just about offering things that are more exciting than internet and then broadband access. There's just a very clear, obvious business model to this, which is if you can own everything vertically, you're going to be able to benefit yourself.
And I think it's this is not HBO Max versus Netflix. It's HBO Max against every other thing you do on the internet, right? Whether that's watching someone play a game, or streaming a church service, right, or just video chatting with a friend, right? So this isn't some, oh, we got to make sure that Netflix has an equal playing field, right? Netflix can fight on their own. It's everybody else. Right?
Yeah, Netflix just came to mind as a different streaming service. That's a really important point.
So this is a good segue, I think, into a question that I wanted to ask you, Ryan. Where we see the California legislation screwing up HBO and AT&T's plans to zero rate HBO Max.
Yeah.
In the broad strategy, where do these state legislative measures come in to screw up the plans of companies like AT&T in their power grabs in a non-neutral environment?
Yeah. So, I would channel Senator Scott Wiener of California, who was who wrote the bill and fought to get it all the way through in California. And, saying that he wished he didn't have to do it. Right. But the FCC forced his hand by abdicating. They literally just said, not our problem. We don't have the power to do this. Not even we don't want to, but literally saying, the way we interpret the law, we don't even have any power. right? We couldn't do net neutrality if we wanted to. So, I would say the sort of the general thing around state laws is they're great. So far, they've been fought in court multiple times, and every time they have won in terms of being legal. The most recent court case, it was great. The judge basically in the first hearing in the case basically told the ISPs that like they're going to lose in his court and go talk to the Ninth Circuit, right? So this was like a preliminary hearing. So now the ISPs are already like appealing to the Ninth Circuit. So I think what it does is it shows that it's really important. It modifies behavior, and it's not written that it changes behavior for every other state, but if ISPs want to do that, it's the simplest way to do it. They can, and we've seen models for this in the past, right? So you would think there's a federal data breach law that like if a company lost your data, they would have to tell you. There isn't. There are 50 state laws, right? And that works just fine. But a federal standard is better. And I think what California also says is like, if we're going to, do this as a law in Congress, that this is the floor. Like you have to do it at least as strong as California's, right? And I think we've seen that too. That same sort of thing happens with like privacy laws, right? Where like states start to move in, and states being kind of the innovators, and then Congress steps in and says, okay, like we'll do that. So I don't know how much we'll see other states mimicking California or not. I think a lot of them are still watching the court case to see whether they're going to do it. But I think it feels like the action is moving to DC and what's going to happen with the FCC and possibly in Congress. So I think, California plays a strong role there. I think, if the election had gone differently, I think California would have a bigger role. We'd see more states doing things. But I think maybe at this point, the states are more interested in things like how can we make, sort of ancillary issues, like what can we do to make broadband more affordable, right? And I think the FCC should handle net neutrality.
So this is a point that I think should be brought up in basically every conversation about net neutrality, because it's something that I see come up pretty much every time it's discussed on Reddit and just broadly on the internet. And you'll hear this criticism all the time, that we lost net neutrality in 2017 and the sky isn't falling. The internet is really fast and people can, watch whatever they want to watch. We're seeing 5G get deployed. To those people who think, the sky isn't falling and that it's not a big deal, what do we say to them?
Not true. I think, look, Ryan named this example earlier, but this is one we go to. In the summer of 2018, a fire department in California, Santa Clara, California, had a quote unlimited data plan that they had from Verizon, and in the midst of fighting a fire, because they went over their arbitrary data cap, their data was throttled by Verizon, which is just, is so bad. And because the FCC doesn't have Title II authority, they didn't address this. And so this isn't like a quote classic net neutrality violation per se, but it's something that could be addressed with Title II authority, which is what was repealed by Ajit Pai. So there's a real world consequence right there. We also just named, AT&T basically allowing HBO Max to not count against as data cap. There's another real world example that wasn't addressed by the FCC. So there's more of these too. I mean, you talk about all the unfair ways that data caps, which are extremely problematic, are basically used by these ISPs. Which you want to talk about like a greedy sort of scheme. I mean, that's my feeling on data caps. So, I mean, there's all these real world examples that have happened just in the short time that it has been repealed. The reason we haven't seen, though, more blocking, more throttling, more paid prioritization schemes is one reason is we talked about the massive amount of grassroots pressure. We also talked about these two bills that did pass, the Congressional Review Act that passed in the Senate to reinstate net neutrality in Title II, and then the bill that actually passed in the House called the Save the Internet Act. This is a live issue with tons of public support that does have focus in Congress. So I think that's sort of that is keeping, and then obviously the law that Ryan's talked about passed in California. So, I think these ISPs do know that lawmakers are paying attention. And the only reason lawmakers are paying attention is because of the massive grassroots support behind this. Because otherwise we can't compete with these guys when it comes to lobbying, right? Which is itself an indictment on our sort of like system of governance. But what we do have is sort of grassroots, power behind this. So, I would just say there have been actual harms that have happened, and they're going to, if we don't win this back and time passes and there's not attention paid to it, things are only going to get worse. I just think it's just a completely bogus argument.
Yeah, I jump on with Mark is absolutely right there. Two other things that, so one, a lot of the stuff you're going to see in terms of harms are happen behind the scenes, like what happened in 2013 and 2015, where, services are getting throttled at the edge and they're getting shakedown things. That seems to have gotten a little bit better, but there's literally like everyone who's involved in those contracts, right? Is subject to NDAs, and they won't talk about it, and they don't want to talk about it because then they know the next time they go into negotiations, right, they're going to get hammered even harder. So there's that, and then we see some that are confused, like you can literally see in your face, right? If you go to all of the wireless providers like websites and look at their plans, your unlimited data like limits you to 480p video. Right? If you're like on the basic unlimited, and then, you have to pay a bunch more to get all the way up. That's literally throttling, right? That's not opt-in. You're deciding that like the thing I want to watch in HD, like maybe it's really important to me. Maybe it's like my daughter competing in the Olympics. Right? I want to watch that in full color. Like that's literally like a violation. And then I think finally, right, they've had to be on their best behavior. And I love if you permit me 1 second, the judge, the federal court judge in February stopped the ISPs making this exact argument and said this, which I think is fantastic. I'm going to stop you there only because I've read that argument, and honestly, I didn't find it persuasive at all. I wouldn't go down that path. And I don't want you to have to argue something that's really going to fall on deaf ears. And I'll tell you why. And that is everybody's been on their best behavior since 2018, primarily because of the stay in this case and the decision to wait for whatever happened in the DC court fight. So I don't place a whole lot of weight on the argument that we've been fine since 2018. There's no need to worry, right? And I think like the judge gets it, right? Like, yes, they have largely been on their best behavior. And I'd say the flip side of that is the ISPs told the FCC and everybody else that like these rules were so onerous, and like if we didn't have these rules, we would have so much innovation. Like what innovation have we seen from like ISPs since 2017 that wouldn't have been possible under previous net neutrality rules?
Also,
and I was just going to jump in there and say, like, just Joe, to your question of people saying like it's all fine. Well, maybe it's fine for them, but that's kind of like a biased and, privileged perspective, because for a whole swath of the country, it's actually not fine. And, to your point, Ryan, where they, the ISPs were saying like, oh, these are restricting innovation. And ISP said that we'll be able to expand broadband access without these regulations. And, since the repeal of net neutrality and Title II authority have lied or, falsely reported information about how they've expanded broadband access. But the truth is that it hasn't broadly expanded to new communities in ways that would have been impossible under this authority. And it's primarily left out the poor, rural, and communities of color who, especially during the pandemic, we saw these stories of kids who had to get online in restaurant parking lots and coffee shop parking lots, or go and sit in the parking lot outside their school in order to get access to their online education. Like the communities that these are hurting are not fine. And so it's, it's easy for some people to say like, oh, it's fine, and I can still watch HBO and Netflix or whatever it is. But the truth is that there are definitely a lot of communities who have not gotten the broadband access they so desperately need.
Yeah, I mean, go tell the kid doing homework in the Taco Bell parking lot that everything is
Exactly.
fine as it should be. So that's why I just say it's almost like I don't even like addressing it because it's so bogus. But and then the other thing too is if you really want to know like where the ISP's hearts are at, I'm trying to think during the oral arguments back in like 2013, and Ryan and Caitlin can correct me if I'm wrong, but they I, they had sued to overturn like a weaker set of net neutrality protections, which they were successful in doing because it was based in the wrong legal authority, which is why we need Title II legal authority. But one of the things that Verizon said was that if it were not for these rules, they would be looking to do things like favor their own services. You can go on Free Press's website, actually. If you look up net neutrality violations, they have a brief history and they address this. I'll quote it so I get it right. Verizon counsel said, "I'm authorized to state from my client today that but for these rules, we would be exploring those types of arrangements. The arrangements being the judge had asked whether the phone giant would favor some preferred services, content, or sites over others if the court overruled the agency's existing open internet rules." So there you go. They said, yeah, we'd be looking into that. We'd be trying to do it. So they're on record.
Yeah, the other one I loved in that court case is they also said that they would want to be able to charge access fees. So if Yelp didn't pay Verizon $40,000 a month, Verizon could just block Yelp for all Verizon subscribers. And that's not blocking because it's not about content, right? It's about them not paying a fee. So that's not blocking. That's just a contract dispute. And so there's sort of like what. I think your point is right. Like what Verizon and AT&T like to say, in nice commercials and things, and then what they actually say in court and what they really want to do.
So where do we go from here? Like, what are the next steps in this fight, and how can people that aren't fully constantly immersed in activism participate in this and help get net neutrality back? So like, what are the next steps and how can people help?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark mentioned this at the beginning, but I think the next step in the process is getting a fifth commissioner appointed at the FCC. And we've been working and running this massive petition where we gathered 100,000 signatures at battleforthenet.com. People submitted hundreds, maybe thousands of tweets targeting key leaders in the administration to try and make this more of a priority and push it forward amid everything else that's going on. So I think that's the big thing. And then that will set off a string of steps and points of engagement and comment periods and things like that at the FCC to push them to reinstate net neutrality. So I think that's kind of the big next step. And then, as we've also mentioned, there's this effort to enshrine these protections into law through passing bills in Congress. And, I think we've mentioned the Save the Internet Act. So that legislation is likely forthcoming again, and will be another way for people to engage, to encourage their legislators to take action on this, to support this legislation. And, that's not like happening this month, but when that happens, we will be reaching out to people and giving them opportunities to engage and pressure their lawmakers to support it.
Yeah, there's gonna be lots of opportunities in 2021 we're gonna need folks basically. That's why we're kind of like, let's get this nomination announced, because then we're gonna have to confirm them in the Senate. There's gonna be a rulemaking to reinstate Title II, which I feel good about because you'll have 3 commissioners ostensibly that support it, but we'll need to make sure the public's voices are heard. And then there's going to be legislation, like Caitlin said, that will basically, what that'll allow us to do is, if we can get this passed in Congress, it'll just add a level of permanent aspect to this where it can't be, as easily overturned in courts. So there's just going to be but we're set up good on all those fronts. So we just got to keep up the pressure.
Cool. Well, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us on this live stream today. I really appreciate it. We are also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We've got links down below if people want to subscribe on either of those platforms. And we have RSS if you just have your own app and you want to plug the podcast into that. It's pretty compatible with everything. If you like this content, if you like this channel, please make sure that you like this video, that you subscribe to the channel, that you click the bell so that you get notifications for when we go live in the future. We do this every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. So we'll be back here next week. Thank you for everybody that was able to join the live stream today. It was a really interesting discussion, and I really appreciate everybody joining. I meant to ask this before I did the whole closing thing, but do any of you have anything to plug or any closing statements before we wrap up?
No, I would say just this has been fun. So my only plug would be keep listening to Fight for the Futures podcast every Friday, right?
Every Friday at 1
Cool.
p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
week.
Well,
Bye.
Bye.
bye.